Earlier I said that one of the goals of Katana is to be portable. So the code I write should work under different hosts, under different servers. And let's see if we can take our existing code and get it to work under IIS, or at least IIS Express, which is close enough. It's essentially the core of IIS, but I can run it from the command line. In order to do this, I need to make a few structural changes to the project. I also need to install another package. This one also pre-release. This is the Microsoft.owen.host.system.web. Installing this package will add an assembly that knows how to plug into the ASP.NET pipeline by installing an HTTP module and an HTTP handler, but I don't need to know that with any of the code that I've written. All of that happens in the background when this code gets loaded into an app domain. And speaking of app domains, the environment's going to be a little bit different now. IIS does not load executables into its process space. This will no longer be code that I want to run directly from the command line. Therefore, my program class and its main method no longer needed. I no longer need to tell the web app when to start or what port to listen to. That's all under the control of IIS. So I don't need that code. But the important part here is that I still have a startup class, I still have an iApp builder, I still have my configuration code and middleware and Owen components that can work without knowing that they're going to be under IIS. But what I do need to do is come into the project properties, and instead of being an executable, let's turn this into a class library, just a regular DLL. And when I run a web server like IIS, it expects to find DLLs in a bin directory. Not bin debug, just bin. If I make those changes and do a build, everything still succeeds. And let me come out to the command line and come into dev katana intro bin, and get a directory listing. And it's inside of here where we will now find katana intro.dll. So we just took all of our existing code, and instead of building an exe, a console application, I built a DLL. And to run this with IIS Express, well, I can do that from the command line, would be the easiest way to do this. So I want to go to Program Files, IIS Express, and run iisexpress.exe. I have to tell it the path to my application, and the path is this directory where the Katana intro project lives. So cdev katana intro, katana intro. And now we have a running instance of IIS Express. It's listening, by the way, on port 8080, which isn't because of any code that I wrote, just happens to be a coincidence. Now let me go to localhost 8080, and I can still see hello. And this is running in IIS Express. And you can see IIS Express is logging these requests, so it can say request started. It was a GET request to localhost 8080. Here's a piece of my middleware that's running, requesting the root of the application. The response was 200. So you can see the output from my middleware interspersed with output from IIS Express. Let's see if the web API is still working. /API/greeting. That still produces valid XML. And so now I have a code base and an application and some components that can run in a console app or run under IIS. All I needed to do was package them up a little bit differently. And you could certainly see this as being a DLL that could be referenced from, let's say, a WPF application or a console application. That way, when I build the project, it's always producing a DLL. It can easily load into any host process, whether it's IIS or IIS Express or some custom application that I built. And that's why Katana is a rather exciting project. Now, one bit of mystery here, something you might have thought of, is back in my program, since I no longer have webapp.start that specifies the startup configuration class, how did this web application ever get configured correctly? Because it obviously is using the web API correctly. It's obviously using this piece of middleware to do some logging about the request and the response. Well, this is a bit of magic. Essentially, when I brought in a reference for that system.web host, that package knows it's going to be in an environment where some other process is in control. Some other process like IIS Express that doesn't know anything about Owen or Katana or how to call these configuration classes. But there is a bit of code in there that can run during startup, and it can go out and look for my startup class. That is, there's a bit of code in that system web host that will look in 3 places to try to find this configuration information. You can specify the configuration class to use in a web.config file in the app settings. If you do that, then it makes it easy to switch between different configurations, different startup classes that you might have written. So you might have a test startup and a production startup and a QA startup. They all register slightly different middleware. You can also specify your configuration using an assembly level attribute. And finally, the last thing it will do is, using reflection, look through the namespace that matches the assembly name. In other words, look through the namespace Katana intro and find a class called startup. So it will use reflection to locate this class, instantiate it, and invoke the configuration method, passing in an app builder that allows all the magic to happen.